Hi, I'm Mark Villasana, owner of Northwest Insurance Agency and proud SMU alumni. Insurance rates right now are awful. You know it and I know it. But give me a call and let's take a look at your current policy and see if there's anywhere I can save you some money. My phone number is 214-352-5656, or you can email me at markv@nwagencies.com, or just give me a call to talk SMU athletics. Pony up.
This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at ontheponyexpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody.
1, 2, 3, let me go.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. I am Billy Embody. Thanks for joining me. We're presented by our friends at Northwest Insurance Agency. You heard from Mark Villasana in the opening. Time to give him a call, find out more about what he can do for you with your insurance. And we are finding out a lot about the SMU Mustangs in spring ball. We've been reporting on it at ontheponyexpress.com. We're now in the thick of spring ball. We're officially a week into it. It is Wednesday. So we just wrapped up practice number 2 of the week. They had Tuesday, Wednesday, and then off Thursday for us watching. And then Friday, Saturday, we'll be back at it. So lots of takeaways early in spring ball. And so make sure you're at ontheponyexpress.com. Following all of that, it's just $1 for your first week, guys. So jump on board with us. The message board is really a lot of fun right now, especially with basketball gearing up for more transfer visits after the dead period. And then you've also got a couple of guys who have popped in for visits on the transfer portal side of things for hoops. So we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk mainly about spring football, some early takeaways that I've got for you guys to share. And we'll do a lot of that for the most part, as well as touch on some recruiting, because recruiting is heating up. And I do want to share with you guys a couple of things on that front. So lots to get to on today's podcast. Make sure you guys reach out to Mark Villasana, Northwest Insurance Agency, and he'll get you hooked up. Let's dive in here to SMU football in spring ball now. And there are plenty of takeaways. I feel like, and maybe it's because we know so much about last year's team in terms of who's now gone, and then you've got the returning guys. And it feels like this group of incoming players we know a lot about, in a sense. We know about the high school guys because we've covered them closely. They've been committed for a long time, and they're now on campus. Then you have the transfer guys. You look at the guys that they brought in. A lot of them have that true experience, starting experience for the most part. You know, even the guys who have been injured, you kind of know what you're getting in those players in a sense. And you know the floor, and you know kind of the ceiling as well. So there are a lot of things that I feel like we think we know about this version of the SMU Mustangs as it stands 2 weeks away from the transfer portal window opening for the spring. And so we'll dive into some of those things. But I think that's probably one of the things that I'm most excited about is in terms of the grip on the roster and the players that are at SMU. I feel like we have a good understanding of what they're all here to do, how they fit in. And we talked with Garen Justice on Wednesday, if you're listening to this on Wednesday, squeeze it in the evening. But we talked with Garen Justice on Wednesday, and I kind of joked with him. I said, right off the bat, if you watch the interview on our YouTube channel, I said, so you've got the starters all written in permanent marker and all of that, right? And he goes, oh, some of that, but you've certainly got you've certainly got a large number of like players that where they're going to be, kind of what they bring to the table in a sense. So I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to SMU's offensive line is you kind of understand where some pieces fit in. And then on the flip side, when he got done with his interview, I said, you really haven't shaken things up much on the offensive line, which last spring he was kind of doing that. There was a lot of Justin Osborne at center. You had this, you had that. And he said, no drama is a good thing. And I think the offensive line is one of the positions where we see SMU bringing back multiple players that they know a lot about. We see SMU bringing in players that they feel like they know exactly where they're going to fit. You look at Addison Nichols stepping in as the Arkansas transfer at center, looks like a really, really strong fit there, and somebody that's going to be in a strong position to be one of the top players on this offensive side of the ball in general, just with his understanding of the game, leadership, his strength. I think he's had a really good spring camp as he's gotten settled in. And, we've seen a lot of, I think, the starting offensive line, or at least starting right now, offensive line and the starting defensive line really have some good battles. That's probably the thing that stood out to me the most. And I enjoy watching that group the most, just because you kind of do see a lot of the ones versus ones, twos versus twos kind of thing, in the sense that when they're scrimmaging, when they're in team, you get to see that, but guys do a lot of the thud tackle, or they take care of each other. I mean, that's just how SMU practices. That's how a lot of teams practice in college football these days. And so you don't always see some of the other levels of the football team come into focus as far as when the bullets are flying, what it's really going to look like. You can kind of see some glimpses, you can kind of see some flashes, but that's why they play the games on Saturdays. That's why, everybody totally missed on Florida State, being what it was last year. That's sometimes what needs to happen is you need to see some of those teams in action against real competition. So I think when you look at SMU and what they've put together as a whole right now, you've got a group that I think in terms of the starting lines is pretty strong on both sides of the ball. Like that, you talk to coaches, you talk to sources, however you want to get your information, and you observe practice. I think you could see that the starting offensive line for SMU is going to be a solid group. The starting defensive line for SMU is going to be a solid group. What I think the biggest question that we're learning this spring is while there are bodies, there are talented players in some positions, in that two hole, or trying to work their way up the depth chart. You haven't necessarily seen them emerge as guys that you would feel like incredibly confident in going into a game or starting multiple games. And that's somewhat scary, because when we looked at last year's defensive line, for example, I think we saw a group that, right off the bat, you felt like, okay, we think Jonathan Jefferson can do this here and go from Georgia and come into a bigger role at SMU and really shine. We think that bringing in Jafari Harvey is perfect in terms of, helping Isaiah Smith and giving a little bit of help opposite of Elijah Robertson, Cam Robertson, and doing all of those things. All those things made a ton of sense. And then you look at this year's group in spring ball, and you see SMU bringing in players that, like Jeffrey Emba and Terry Webb, very confident they're going to be good players for SMU. I think Jeffrey Emba, if he takes to the development track that Calvin Thibodeau wants to put him on and is putting him on, he'll emerge as a really key player for this defensive line. And in the ACC, Terry Webb looks the part. His quickness, his size, it seems like he's going to be a natural starter and a high-level one for SMU. But then you get to guys like Eric Taylor, and you haven't had Jonathan Jefferson out there lately. He's been hurt. And a couple other guys that are kind of fighting for reps, and you're like, okay, all of a sudden SMU's thin at defensive tackle. Whereas at like Bandit, they've got Isaiah Smith, they've got DJ Warner, they've got Cam Robertson, they've got I'm missing one here, I feel like, and I'm going to kick myself whenever it is. But you've got Isaiah Smith, Cam Robertson, Trey Wilson's in there, DJ Warner. Oh, of course, Billy Walton. It looks like a freak show right now in practice. So you have that depth, that talent. It needs to convert onto the field this fall, and those guys continue to step up. But you feel good about the depth on the outside edge rushers of the defensive line. The interior of the defense tackle, I think, is a group that we're seeing where without Jonathan Jefferson out there, you can kind of see, okay, they need to maybe go out and get somebody in the portal if they can, at a very difficult position to do that in the portal in that spring window. That's the positive of having the spring portal window, is that you could go out and address that in that portal window. So those are kind of some of the interesting things I think on the defensive line is now that we've seen a couple guys get nicked up, do they go out and address that position one more time? That'll be something to keep an eye on. But very encouraged by the starting group that both the defense and offensive lines have in place. Like very strong groups that should, based on what we saw last year, in particular from the offensive line, a group of Savion Byrd, of Logan Parr, Addison Nichols, you think is going to be an upgrade over Ja'Kai Clark, potentially. Right guard, you've probably got to figure out a little bit more. You've got Nate Anderson, you've got Alex Woods, you could, Garen Justice was talking about kicking certain guys inside if they need to. You could do all of those things and make that position work. Right tackle, you have a quote-unquote franchise right tackle coming into SMU. Returning to SMU and PJ Williams. So important to note that he has been off the charts good in practice, really looks the part. And SMU obviously very lucky to keep him in the fold for this season, because he's a very good offensive tackle. So when you look at that group, left to right, pretty good situation that SMU is going to have. And that's not to mention Zion Nelson, who's working his way back. You have some of these other guys that are working their way back, and like a Dramad Odoms coming in. It could be a big deal for SMU on the offensive line at the tackle position to get the most out of those guys when they're back, either fully healthy or in the mix. And there is a lot of excitement around those guys coming in and providing that type of influx of talent, especially Dramad Odoms. You've got King Large pushing on the outside. He might not be, there and ready yet to start, but, long term, he's somebody that could factor in. So there's a number of players on the offensive line that are pushing. And I think that's where the culture is really kind of taken over. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this with Hayden Howerton when we get him on the pod and get him, given his thoughts on the offensive line as he gets to spend more time around them. But the thing that I have picked up the most about this team on spring is just how much we know about them. Like, we have an understanding, because SMU's been in the ACC, they've gone to the championship, they've gone to the college football playoff, they've done it all, and we've gotten exposure to so many levels of teams, whether it be quality teams or whether it be poor quality teams, whether it be fast starts, slow starts. There's so much we know about this team. And even though they lose so much, there just seems like there is a better understanding of the kind of body of work that they have put together as a group, the leadership they have coming back. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come in and go all the way this time and win an ACC championship or go out and win a game in the college football playoff. It just means, I think, that SMU is settling in as an ACC program. There's no more change coming for the most part, right? Like, there's whatever, the 5-year runway, there's the next round of realignment, whatever. But SMU is not in a situation where you have a coaching change. Okay, Rhett Lashley comes in. He has to take over the roster and build it up. Okay, year one didn't go so hot on defense. Let's go out and acquire a bunch of really good players. Scott Simons builds a group. Offense gets rolling. SMU wins an AAC championship. Okay, moving up into a conference. Got to replace this. Got to change that. Got to do all these things in the portal. SMU knows that they are always going to attack the portal and plug in holes. And they know to keep the standard where they've now set it. They have to do that. But there is a sense of settlement with this type of situation that they're in, because they've recruited players in the transfer portal with multiple years, because they have their quarterback coming back, because they have some key offensive linemen coming back. They have some key defenders coming back. They have a lot of situations on this group that you feel better about because there are returning players. When you talk about this football team, and I think I started out with the offensive line and defensive line because I think they're a great microcosm of the team. You have returners, you have newcomers, you have a mix of those guys being pushed together, and you're going to see where they are, where they end up. And at this stage, you should feel good about where they're at. And you want to know why? Because SMU was an imperfect team that went out and won every single regular season game that it had in the ACC. And guess what? Look, I know they ended up getting quote unquote lucky, and Florida State wasn't Florida State. Louisville, they went out on the road and beat them, a team that ended up beating Clemson at Clemson. You had Miami. That wasn't on the schedule. But guess what? SMU could have beaten Miami. The body of work shows SMU could have beaten Miami. Pitt was 8-0 was 8-0 on the regular season. SMU beat the brakes off them, broke them. Tough Cal team, down a quarterback. SMU took care of business. Boston College vanquished the Demons. You just have these things that SMU has done. And regardless of what the league was or wasn't last year, a lot of the pieces that can make it happen again are back. And a lot of the pieces that can make SMU competitive again are back. And so that's the interesting thing when you talk about this team is outside of on offense, outside of running back, you shouldn't feel like there is a massive drop off from what SMU had. There should be improvement in some areas, because, hey, you've got a Matthew Hibner, you've got an RJ Maryland who's going to be back. You've got those pieces that are now together and you know what you have in them for a full year. You have a wide receiver room that maybe it gets a little bit better because of an influx of young talent and fresh blood. Offensive line, I kind of think they improved it. Guess what, guys? Savion Byrd, he's not the only one to struggle against Abdul Carter, who I believe ran a 4.38. I mean, he could very well be the number one pick in the draft. Crazy. There's a lot that we know about this team as far as the foundation, the floor of figuring out what this team is going to be. And I think the offensive and defensive lines are really good, microcosms of where this team is. Newcomers, returners, some key battles that are ongoing, and how those battles go will determine A, whether SMU addresses them or not in the transfer portal, and B, how this football team ends up being this fall and whether or not they end up taking that next leap as a program and winning an ACC championship or going undefeated in its non-conference slate that they've got. They've got all those things that they can do if they want to. So look, guys, do want to remind you guys, and we'll talk a lot more about this football team, but I do want to remind you guys about our friends at Mignon. Make sure you head up to Plano. This is a can't-miss restaurant. Nick Natur, former SMU offensive lineman, his family, they've run it for decades now. It's right there on Preston Road, just south of the HEB. It is a world-class dining experience. Really excited to get over there. I was talking with Michelle. I said, look, we've just got to go sit up at the bar for a little happy hour one of these days and just celebrate Jack being one. We did it. We threw the party. We deserve a little bit of celebration for ourselves that we did, and let's do it at Mignon. It's that perfect space, perfect venue for any type of celebration, whether it be graduation coming up, you've got anniversaries, birthdays, whether you want to do a brunch, whether you want to do a dinner. Check them out. Mignon, they do brunch on they do brunch on Sundays. They do dinner 7 days a week. Make sure you tell them that the On the Pony Express podcast sent you. So appreciate Mignon for their support of the On the Pony Express podcast. All right, as we dive into some other spring takeaways, I want to say, we're only a few practices in, right? And this is, Rhett Lashley used the term truncated spring. I think he used the term truncated spring, but, or condensed, maybe it was, but it's true. Spring is piled into 4 weeks on the button, maybe 5, depending on how the days work out. But SMU has a spring football run that is like a fall camp. It's four-ish weeks. It is the 15 practices or so, and they're going to get after it, and they're going to get work done, and then they're going to be done. It's going to be over in the blink of an eye. I mean, shoot, we're already down 1 week, and this is a key opportunity for this staff. And my opinion is, I don't know this, I haven't talked to anyone. My opinion is is they came together, the staff came together after the first week. And granted, only one full padded practice. And there's already those conversations going on. How do we look here? Rhett Lashley brings it up in the season. He says, we go in every bye week and we say, how do we feel about this group, that spot? Do we have the players that we think the next year can take us to where we need to go? And let's take a look at that. Those conversations are ongoing throughout spring. And I think there are very early signs as to whether somebody is going to be successful or not. And a couple of the players that I think is really in the right position to emerge are the two freshman wide receivers. And Dalen Singleton and Jalen Cooper are certainly living up to the billing so far as they get their first spring practice in as SMU Mustangs. Look, when you see this wide receiver position, which includes Jordan Hudson, who's really stepped up, I feel like, this spring, just in terms of what he's brought to the table day in, day out, competitiveness, you have to look at Romello Brinson as the starter opposite of him on the outside. But what you have is two freshmen in Jalen Cooper and Dalen Singleton who are both playing on the outside. You have Randy Reese and Jackson Lavender on the inside right now. Maybe we see some shifting. Maybe Link Rhodes plays, outside and that kicks in a freshman inside, or maybe Link Rhodes comes in and provides some competition there at the slot receiver position. But when you see Jalen Cooper being that high volume pass catcher, comfortable over the middle, he made a couple catches that really stood out to me on Wednesday's practice where, it was just quick slant route from whoever was at quarterback and he'd catch it. I don't want to use the word turtle or whatever, but those possession receivers that catches a slant where SMU is not really, at least in my general kind of opinion on this offense, has not hit the slant route necessarily consistently. But Jalen Cooper is somebody that you can trust to catch that football over the middle, catch it in traffic, and secure it, because that is one of the strengths of his game, is catching the football. Just in terms of being sure-handed, he's a technician. He creates a little separation, able to catch the football. You pick up 7, 8, 9, 10 yards on that slant, and who knows? Maybe you break one. That's what he did in practice. One of the first days actually, maybe it was Tuesday now that I'm thinking about it, but he caught a pass along the sideline, caught a curl route from Keldrick Luster, and was able to make a move. And then boom, he's off and running, makes a big play. That's the type of stuff that Jalen Cooper brings to the table. Dalen Singleton has the speed to really make sure that opponents have to respect that. They have to play off coverage. And he has displayed the quickness at the line of scrimmage to make guys not necessarily be able to get hands on him, which I think is equally impressive. So there's a lot of moving pieces on this team in terms of, well, you could see where certain spots would be question marks. And we'll talk about one of the question marks here in just a second. But you can also see where maybe fresh blood, maybe newcomers can turn it up a notch. I look at center Addison Nichols, up a notch. I mean, no disrespect to Ja'Kai Clark. He's played 40, 50 games in college football as a starter on the offensive line in power conference football. But when you look at the athleticism, the strength, the SEC experience of Addison Nichols, you feel really good about that position and his just ability to move and anchor and do all those things. There are positions where, hey, look, I love Moochie Dixon's speed. I love Keyshawn Smith's athleticism. I think in terms of those two things, you're going to find it a tough duo to replace in that regard, like Jalen Cooper trying to replace a Keyshawn Smith. Jalen Cooper might not be the freaky athlete that Keyshawn Smith is. I think he hit 37.5 on his Virtus Pro Day. Moochie Dixon, one of the fastest guys on this team, unquestioned, might be the fastest guy on this team the last couple years. And he's certainly put it together at times. But could you find that Jalen Cooper and Dalen Singleton end up being better actual football players than those two? Maybe. I mean, it just could very well be the case. Jalen Cooper and Dalen Singleton both proved it at the highest level of Texas high school football with their production, consistency, all of those things. It's just a matter of how long does it take them to adjust to the college game. So as we look at kind of the question marks on this team, we'll dive into a couple here in just a moment, but I do want to remind you guys that we're also presented by our friends at the Thomas Auto Group. head up 75 McKinney, visit their 3 dealerships, Ford, Subaru, Volkswagen, and find out about the Thomas Promise. They will give you employee pricing on new and pre-owned vehicles when you mention on theponyexpress.com. So lots of great savings up there, great service as well. Had my Jeep serviced by their department at Bob Thomas Ford. It was great. Really enjoyed my time getting that done. It was painless. So whether it be service, whether it be collision, they have a collision center, whether it be buying a new vehicle or pre-owned for that matter, Thomas Auto Group will take care of you. So go to thomasautogroup.com to browse their entire selection of cars today. All right, the question marks on this SMU football team entering spring were pretty obvious. I felt like running back and corner were 2 questions. Like, you have 2 position groups that are on the total opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of your questions, right? Corner had a bunch of returners. They went out and got a talented addition in Marcellus Barnes, and you feel like it's a position that should be serviceable once again. Like that bare minimum. And if you look at the defense last year, you look at the pass rush, you look at their ability to stop the run and force opponents to pass the ball. You saw some chunk plays given up. That's something that Ricky Hunley talked about on Tuesday, wanting to cut down on. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, if that's your quote unquote hole on defense, you're kind of fine. You know, you want teams to be one-dimensional trying to throw the football on you, because SMU's always been able to assemble over the last couple of years under Rhett Lashley a really talented group of defensive linemen that can get after the quarterback. They can create havoc. And when you have that type of a group, your corners don't necessarily have to be all-stars. You know, when you stop the run and shut down an opponent's ability to ground it out, that's important, and it helps your corners. So when you look at this cornerback group, I think it's important to note that if SMU is not necessarily going to be at the level defensively that they were in 24, because I don't think that they are, just doesn't mean that they're going to suck. And I think Scott Simons is a tremendous defensive coordinator, and he's been rewarded for that, as he should be. But it's a tall task to follow that group. I mean, there's no Elijah Roberts out there. You know, Jared Harrison Hunt's, kind of flying up draft boards a little bit. Jafari Harvey's a freak. I think the bandit position, you could see a little bit of that similarity in terms of production and value you get out of that group. But Cam Robertson going to have to step up. Can he and Trey Wilson, the Baylor transfer, do it at the strong side defensive end spot? I think absolutely. You know who's impressed me? Trey Wilson. There's no doubt that dude has brought some athleticism to the table and is really going to be a guy that they can rely on. But to help these corners, you're going to have to really produce as a whole across the defensive line. And so when you look at the cornerback spot, I don't think it's one where they're going to add anyone, but I looked at it as a question, because Deuce Harmon, you liked what you thought you were getting last spring. It was funny. Ricky Hunley was talking exactly about this. And Deuce Harmon came in the spring for Texas A&M, and it was a huge adjustment, leaving Jimbo Fisher's Texas A&M and joining the culture of what SMU has going on the hilltop. And they were disappointed. You know, he didn't say that entirely, but you could tell that they were disappointed with what Deuce Harmon put together in the spring. And then he came in in the fall, and he had some adjustments, and he kind of started to get his footing in conference play, and I think performed well. And he was targeted. So was Jalen Davis Robinson, when they were in and kind of battling for those spots. Deuce Harmon and Jalen Davis Robinson have to step up, because Marcellus Barnes is coming in here from Syracuse after a strong freshman year. He had an injury. He had a shoulder. He's recovering from it. He's in a non-contact jersey out there. He's wired the right way. He should end up being one of your starting corners. So if that's the case, that's great. And if he plays at the trajectory he's on, then you're in a good situation. But if he doesn't, then you've got to figure out, all right, what do we do here to fix this? Because Deuce Harmon needs to take a step forward. Jalen Davis Robinson needs to take a step forward. Speedy Nettles is in his second year of the program. He needs to step up. And you have these options, and you need to see somebody step up. And Javion Holiday, Jay Holly, is out there in spring ball right now. The Duncanville standout doing his thing. He's a little thin, but he's showed that competitiveness that you want from a corner. He's not backing down from guys like Jordan Hudson. He's not backing down from guys like Romello Brinson. He wants that challenge. And the same goes for Zay Gentry when he gets here this summer. He's going to be somebody that they kind of throw into the fire and see what he's made of early on. And whatever cream rises to the top, Ricky Hunley he didn't mince words. It's not a, bad thing for these guys that are still here, but the competition on this team across the board is very important to note when we talk about all this. That's the culture of competitiveness, and that somebody is working every day to take your job. And the coaches are also looking at the roster every day and saying, okay, do we need to take somebody, bring them in and make a change here? That's something that they'll evaluate. And I think it's now taken hold so well that if they see guys who end up saying, you know what, this isn't for me, they'll bounce, and they're not going to sweat it at all. They're not going to worry about that. They really aren't. And so when you see the cornerback room, I don't know if we've seen questions fully answered by any means, but we have seen them put together some moments where you should feel decent about where they're at. The interesting piece is as big as there is a question mark around what the cornerback room is going to look like this fall in terms of on-field play, I think the personnel is pretty set. As big as that question is, I don't think they end up adding to it or bringing somebody in. They trust that they sign the right people and guys like Zay Gentry, guys like Jay Holly, to kind of bring up that competitiveness and be able to make it work. And same goes for guys like Speedy Nettles, who are coming up in the program. And they have a couple guys at safety that maybe they can move around a touch and play corner at some point down the line, but that day is not today. When it comes to the running back room on the offensive side of the ball, that is another one of my big question marks on this team going into, spring ball. And everybody wants to know how Chris Johnson Jr. is and how Derek McFall is developed. And we'll talk about that in just a second, but do want to remind you guys we're presented by our friends at Status Jet. SMU had quite the luxury of having Brashard Smith back there, running back next to Kevin Jennings last year. Well, you want that level of luxury. The equivalent in the travel world is traveling with Status Jet. So Status Jet is offering discounts for those of you who book and mention on the Pony Express or mention the code PonyUpACC. They'll give you a discount on a round trip flight, and that is what Status Jet will do for you as a friend of the program here. So make sure you guys reach out to them and see what they can offer you when it comes to booking your travel today. They'll hook you up and really set you up with a great situation that you'd expect from a private jet company. So appreciate Status Jet. On the running back room, it is one of the rooms that is now among the thinnest on this football team. We have not seen LJ Johnson out there at practice lately. And so what that means for his future, we'll find out here, I would imagine, at some point. But when you're not out there and we haven't heard it's an injury, it's certainly a question that will soon be answered as to his future. But everybody will, of course, look at that. And the rumor kind of already got out on message boards or whatever that he wasn't out there. But Chris Johnson Jr., Derek McFall, they've already been putting in the work and separating themselves in practice. And their explosiveness is apparent. Derek McFall out there making one-handed catches on screen passes, that's important. That's something you can't just sit back and discount. And I think Derek has really put in a lot of work to be more physically ready to go. I think that's one of the things that stands out to me. He doesn't look like a freshman anymore. He doesn't look skinny. He has gotten his body together for this role. And I think that's important. That's one of the biggest pieces of this puzzle is how is SMU going to find a running back, at least one running back, who is as durable as Brashard Smith was last year. And even though you could tell that he played through some pain and played through some injuries, Brashard Smith was able to make it work. So when I see Chris Johnson Jr. get free there's no one that's going to be able to catch him on this team. When you see Derek McFall get into the open space, you see that shiftiness that he's able to get every single yard out of that play and make it a big one. And that's really, really exciting. And when you look at this running back room, it's a position that SMU is going to have to address, in my opinion, through the transfer portal, if they do lose another player like a LJ Johnson. If he doesn't return to the team, that's something that we're going to have to see them address, because you can't go into the season with 3 running backs. I mean, I think Dramico Green is going to come in and be somebody that they can rely on, but it's that 3 number is a little too thin. 4 could have done it. You know, Jalen Knighton, if you haven't heard, Kamar Wheaton, if you haven't heard, they're not on the roster anymore, listed online. So that's noteworthy in a big way as far as their futures and what they're going to do, which is going to be elsewhere in all likelihood. That's goes from a room that has depth and questions to now being thin and having questions. But I have been pleasantly surprised by the work that Chris Johnson Jr. has put out there on the field. There are moments where you could tell maybe thinks a little bit too much. Like he gets into the hole and he's kind of unsure of maybe where to go, but he isn't necessarily afraid to stick his head in there and go up the middle like Brashard Smith was. So he's a very different style of runner than Brashard, but he does have the wheels. He does have the speed to break the big one. And then Derek McFall's kind of do it all. I mean, he's caught the ball well. He's made people miss. He's really been impressive. So the running back room, thin, you've got questions, but I can tell you that it's a good situation long-term for SMU with those 2 guys both having technically 3 years of eligibility for Chris Johnson Jr. and then 4 for Derek McFall remaining. If their careers pan out like SMU hopes, you're probably not going to get all 3 or all 4, but that'll be a conversation for another day as SMU looks to capitalize on what has been a really explosive offense when you have a guy with legit speed back there. And Chris Johnson Jr. and Derek McFall, they have that. So the running back room is another big question. So look, we could go all day on spring. I'm going to try to, we've got a mailbag episode coming out on Thursday. We will probably do another episode at some point later this week, maybe. Just depends kind of because the Friday, Saturday practices will be a little tough, but we'll have a lot of spring coverage. Hayden Howerton's going out there this weekend as well. So lots to come on that, but I do want to touch on recruiting really quickly as there have been some big visitors who popped in on campus. But before I do want to remind you guys about our friends at My Perfect Franchise. MyPerfectFranchise.net. Andy Ludicky is a franchise consultant. And guess what? I saw the Uter's mom out there at spring practice, and she said, "Hey, I heard you're working with our friend Andy Ludicky." I said, "Yes, Andy Ludicky, MyPerfectFranchise.net." They know each other from down there in Alabama, and Andy Ludicky is planning to make it to an SMU football game this fall to see the Utes in action. And Andy can also talk with you then about your options as a franchise owner. If you're looking to get out of the corporate rat race and pursue that American dream, grow a business on your own, leave a legacy for your family, your family, your children, Andy can help you navigate that process of picking the right franchise where you can accomplish your goals and get fulfilled, whether it be monetarily or just working with something that's more of your passion. Andy can help you navigate all of that. He's a franchise owner himself. So give him a call, 404-973-9901, or email him, Andy, Andy, at myperfectfranchise.net today. So Andy Ludicky bringing it for our On the Pony Express subscribers who have reached out. I've heard some really good things so far. All right. When we get to recruiting, this is where SMU is really starting to do a good job of getting some of their top targets on campus. And one prospect who was on campus for practice on Wednesday is one of the best linebackers in the entire country, and that's Markel Dabney out of the DMV, I believe. Yeah, DMV, Chester, Virginia, one of the top linebackers in America and somebody who has offers from all over the country, Michigan, South Carolina, Virginia Tech, Pitt. Well, he was at SMU today. He's also got an official visit set for the first weekend of May. He'll then go to Virginia Tech, then Pitt, then Michigan. He's a really talented prospect who obviously is getting kind of recruited by a who's who. Michigan's won a national championship in the last couple of years. They are after him. He's got the nice size that you want in a linebacker, and he plans to make his decision August 28th. So this one has a lot of runway for SMU to kind of navigate and figure out if they can get this one trending in their right direction as they look to make a splash. And when I think of making a splash, I think of making a splash in the state of Texas. And they did also host Papungatoa Katoa, or just Toa. Everybody calls him that. So he was back on campus this past weekend for an unofficial visit. And the Mustangs are really sitting in a good position here as they will look to get him on board here early this summer. He's set to take an official visit to SMU May 2nd. I think this one is trending in the right direction. SMU has done some really good things in this recruitment. They're battling the likes of Oklahoma, of Texas A&M, of Texas. But I think the family vibes are very strong here. And I say the same for another guy in the state of Texas, not a guy from DFW, but right there just outside of Austin in Bastrop, Texas. And that is Tiki Hala. Not only is he a member of the all-name team, but he's one of the better defensive tackles in the country. He's a big guy who is really starting to trend, I think, SMU, Notre Dame, probably the final two in this one as they get close to a decision. He is set to make his decision May 10th, which does come right after his official visit to SMU. So that is worth noting there as he goes into this one that, look, at one point, Texas, at one point, USC was feeling good, but SMU is going to get the last official visit before he makes a decision. He's got Notre Dame and USC set for June, but as of right now, things are looking good with SMU and Tiki Hala. They will continue to push to get him across the finish line, and we'll see what happens. But he was a big name that I heard SMU is going to get back on campus here soon, and expect that one to be one where SMU will push right down to the finish and see if they can get him across the finish line. He'd be a huge land. We'll keep a close eye on Tiki Hala, who was on campus for a game this fall as well. One more guy who's been on campus. He's a number 2 defensive lineman in America for the class of 2027. Cedar Hills, Jalen Brewster, really talented prospect here. He was on campus last weekend. And SMU is, look, I will say this. They are pushing the right buttons on a good group of on a good group of prospects across 26 and 27. If you haven't been following SMU recruiting very long, lock in with us at ontheponyexpress.com because it's about to get really interesting. It is my birthday on Thursday, and as a present to myself, I'm going to let you guys talk about my class predictions that are going to go up around lunchtime and kind of take a little half day with SMU being out of it in terms of being on the practice field. So lots of good recruiting scoop to come at ontheponyexpress.com. So make sure you check it out. And also, I'm wearing the Roback shirt. Check out our friends at roback.com, RHOBACK.com. 20% off your first order. That's a huge discount. Use code PONY20. That's PONY20 to get 20% off your first order today. You've got the SMU collection, but look, Masters weekend is next weekend. So make sure you check out their Azalea collection as well and get hooked up with a slick new polo to watch that. And look, we appreciate Roback for supporting us and appreciate all of you guys for listening, watching, however you consume the podcast. Appreciate you guys. And this will be a fun rest of the week for SMU as some big visitors are expected in town as well for Saturday's practice. So appreciate all you guys listening to us at the On the Pony Express podcast. We'll be back later this week. Another episode. We'll catch you next time, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU on 3 and on Instagram at on3SMU. And keep it locked to ontheponyexpress.com for more coverage.